Are you ready? Okay. Good evening. Let's call the meeting to order on this very stormy day. I'm glad everybody is here safely and we're all inside staying dry. All right, you want to call the roll?
Director Kenneth.
Here.
Director Flaher.
Here.
Director Chapman.
Here.
Director Hannibal.
Here.
Director Alexander.
Here.
Director Potter is not present. Director Gill.
Yeah.
And we have a quorum.
Thank you. Okay. At this point, do we have any members of the public that wish to make a comment? This is the portion of the meeting that's reserved for the persons desiring to address the board on any matter not on the agenda tonight.
We do have members of the public. If anybody would like to raise their hand to speak, we may do so now on any matter not on the agenda. There are none.
Okay. All right. So then the next item is the approval of minutes.
I move to approve the minutes.
Okay. Any public comment on the approval of the minutes?
There are none.
So we have a motion by Director Kenneth with a second by Director Alexander. Yep. Well, thank you. Okay, to approve the minutes, let's do a roll call.
Give me 1 second. Can we repeat the movers?
We have Director Kenneth and Director Hannibal.
Director Kenneth.
Yes.
Director Flaher.
Yes.
Director Chapman.
Yes.
Director Hannibal.
Yes.
Director Alexander. Yes. Director Gill.
Yes.
Okay, that motion passes unanimously. All right, moving right along. Now, the next item is the approval of the consent items. Anyone wishing to pull an item from consent? Is there any public comment at this time?
I'll move to approve the consent calendar.
Second.
Okay, so we have a motion from Director Kenneth and a second from Director Flaher.
Okay. Director Kenneth.
Yes.
Director Flaher.
Yes.
Director Chapman. Director Hannibal. Yes. Director Alexander. Yes. Director Gill.
Yes.
Okay, that motion passes unanimously. All right, the fun part. Looking forward to hearing about this now. Okay, so we now have an informational update on the Mayan-Uwakma Coyote Ridge Habitat Protection and Public Access Preview. Thank you so much.
Let's do it right. Great. It's good to be here. My name is Aaron Hebert, and I'm the Natural Resources Manager here at the Santa Clara Valley Open Space Authority. And as the board may know, unfortunately, this item got postponed about a month ago. I think I had made it 3 years in good health, but you run out of luck sometimes. So it's nice to be here again, and it's timely with some of the great work we're doing out at Mayan-Uwakma. I'm here today to sort of preview and talk about how we're going to protect habitats and provide public access, particularly in this next period of time. So, the goals for the presentation are just to give you an informational update first and foremost about the status of things. I am going to spend some time talking about the unique habitats at Mayaono Yakima. That's partly why I'm doing the presentation. Give you a sense of how other parks and open space agencies have managed public access and sensitive habitats, what I'm calling a access toolkit here. Share how we're going to manage public access in this interim period. Think about adaptive management and other operational considerations. And then finally give you a sense of, when is the board going to make some decisions about how we're going to operate Mayaono Yakima. So just to ground us in the calendar that's ahead of us, we're doing this presentation tonight. On April 27th, there is going to be a joint meeting of the Use and Management Committee and the CAC actually at the site. So that'll be a great opportunity to kind of ground yourselves in what I'm talking about today, and a good opportunity to get our CAC involved in what we're doing. In May 20th, that is when we're proposing to actually open this partially to the public, and we'll talk about what the interim access period kind of looks like. And then I'll note by June 11th, that's really the end of Bay checker spot butterfly season. And we'll talk about why that's significant and how it affects operations out there. And then we're kind of into the summer period. We're coming, summer operations. And then I'm not sure how final the date is. Maybe Mark can add to this, but we've tentatively proposed a ribbon cutting, a grand opening on October 14th. So, and then, finally getting into daylight savings time and the beginning of Bay checker spot butterfly season. And then I think, as many of you know, the real attraction out there for many folks is actually wildflowers. So next spring, I think, is going to kind of be the big moment where the most public are there, they're enjoying it, and they're interested in engaging with this landscape. Finally, and we'll get into what this means, but we're proposing to return to the board with what we're calling a final operations plan that'll probably go through the Use and Management Committee, and then should they forward it, take it to the board of directors for consideration.
Yeah, Aaron, if I may, just wanted to mention, I think, since the initial proposal, we're talking now about a 2-day opening in the fall. So October 13th, which is the Friday, would be the official ribbon cutting with elected leaders speaking and media invited. And then on October 14th, this Saturday, there would be a community celebration sort of opening that is not about speakers.
Great. Thank you, Mark. So today we're sort of talking about an operations plan, an interim public access period. And I just want to kind of outline what staff considers to be within this kind of operations plan concept. Habitat protection, hours of operation, seasonal operations, like what are we doing in Bay checker spot butterfly versus not? What's the staffing required to facilitate this? What are our public access goals, and what's that experience going to look like? How are we using our volunteers? You'll see they have a presence in this overall plan. How are we monitoring the effectiveness of all these things that we're proposing? And then what's our adaptive management strategy? So, in the end, we'll sort of circle back to what the details are, but I kind of wanted to frame what an operations plan is before providing some more context. I wanted to start sort of big. I'm an ecologist by trade, and I wanted to give us a sense of, when we're talking about habitats, what are we really talking about? This is a really excellent depiction from the New York Times, from an organization called NatureServe. And what you see in red, and sort of the darker red, is concentrations of imperiled biodiversity. So it's both a representation of biodiversity and where it's under threat. And, this is a bit of California exceptionalism that I can get behind, where you can see on the West Coast in California, a lot of the United States biodiversity is actually concentrated in our area. And as they note, it has the most imperiled biodiversity of any state in the contiguous US. And then if you kind of look at our area in the Bay Area, kind of right there, it's kind of that dark red. And I know we all think that because most of us are from this area or live in this area, but there's a lot of science behind this idea that this is one of 36 biodiversity hotspots in the world. So this is, kind of the context in which we provide parks and public access, where we have these really special habitats, right? And then to sort of zoom into our particular site, on the left here, you have a depiction of what's called critical habitat from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, depicting where this bay checker spot butterfly exists. And you can see there's a few little spots along the peninsula, and then there's kind of this major block down here in Santa Clara Valley. And then if you look on the right, what I'll point out, and this is a kind of colorful geology map, you don't have to get into the details, but it's actually these little slivers of purple on there that are the serpentine soils. And the serpentine soils have this very close association with the bay checker spot butterfly. So the reason I share these pictures is just kind of note, when we're thinking about the bay checker spot butterfly habitat existing nowhere else in the world, existing in that area of biodiversity that we're talking about, it's also even smaller. It's that little purple sliver. One of the things I'll note in the critical habitat picture is pretty much all of those little blocks on the peninsula are actually extinct areas. There are really no longer bay checker spot butterfly habitat. In fact, it's really just this Santa Clara Valley area that you find the species today. So in kind of framing this overall study, there are a couple of points I want to make that we're going to talk about the ridge, and that's kind of in that dark green. And then we're going to, the light green, and then we're going to talk about the Gateway property. And that's where the staging area is located. So just kind of remember those two things. The other thing I'll point out is that the ridge is enrolled in the Valley Habitat Preserve System. And later tonight, you're going to hear from Ed Sullivan from the Valley Habitat Agency. But essentially, by being enrolled, it has certain protections, and it manages those threatened species like the bay checker spot butterfly. The Gateway is not enrolled in the Habitat Reserve System and is kind of treated a little bit differently. So, just to sort of summarize some of the natural resources features here, I want to say that this property is, without a doubt, in my estimation, the crown jewel of special habitats and biodiversity among all of our properties, maybe in all of Santa Clara County. I sort of bounced that idea off some of my colleagues. What do you think? Is this as special a place as I think it is? And indeed, I think that is a kind of common opinion. It's both that serpentine area, this federally endangered butterfly, and this really rare habitat type of the serpentine. So these species and habitats are protected by all sorts of regulations. I'm not going to get into them. I don't think they're super interesting, except to some folks. They're protected by a conservation easement held by the Valley Habitat Agency. So there's a lot of protection for these species as far as what you can and can't do. But, I think the main thing to know is that it's a really special habitat. So in sort of distilling all these different habitat values, I wanted to highlight a couple that I think are kind of the priorities or focuses of how we should think about managing this unique preserve. First is that bay checker spot butterfly and that serpentine habitat. That season, I'll say for what it's worth, is sort of December through May. That's when it's really active. Outside of that, it's really not active or not vulnerable to various threats. And then in the serpentine grasslands, there are a number of rare plant species like fragrant fritillary, which is actually the logo of the Valley Habitat Agency. And I know that's kind of a deep cut, probably not everyone's heard about that one, but it's really quite rare in our area. And there are just a few populations of them. The same thing with the Santa Clara Valley Dudleya, which is another federally threatened species that's only found in this area in sort of rocky outcrops. So these are kind of our focal species and what we're attuned to. There are a lot of other conservation values on the property, like elk and beautiful springs, other interesting native plants, badgers, etc. There's more there, but for the purposes of this conversation, I want to focus on those sort of super rare things that are only found here. The greatest threats from public access are really off-trail use. So people actually walking into this habitat that I'm describing, literally trampling any of these protected species. Invasive plant species are another threat to them that could be introduced from human access. a big part of the construction work out there was to minimize the introduction of foreign seeds and dirt. And there's a lot of technical stuff behind how our planning team manages that. But it's the same thing is true of people, right? Every time we go somewhere, the seeds on our boots could potentially introduce invasive plant species and harm the habitat for the Bay checker spot butterfly. And then unfortunately, in the case of both the butterfly and the Dudleya in particularly, there is actually risk of people handling them and either taking them off the property, or in the case of Dudleya, poaching is unfortunately a big issue, or just impacting them by sort of touching them, right? And then kind of ambiently, there are a variety of environmental threats that you're probably all familiar with. Dr. Stu Weiss's work, of course, highlights the role of nitrogen deposition and the shifts in plant community populations and the impacts to butterflies. So that's kind of an ambient thing, especially being next to 101. Wild pigs are a big issue in the Diablo range in general, and particularly on some of the surrounding properties. So they don't appear to be too much in some of the most sensitive habitat, but sort of left unchecked, it's an issue that could really impact the habitat. And then, of course, climate change, of course, affects all of this that I'm describing. So, you know, we do a lot to take care of the land. I want to emphasize that. First and foremost, we do a lot of integrated pest management. So that's dealing with some of these invasive species. David Mock, who I think you heard from a few months ago, was just out there dealing with barbed oak grass. And that's a direct threat to the plants that support the butterfly. We have conservation grazing out there, which sort of manages the grasslands in a way that's beneficial for the butterfly. And then one of the things I'll note, one of the benefits of partnering with Valley Habitat Agency and enrolling some properties is that they actually pay for certain restoration actions that are supportive of their mission of protecting those species. So it's not just us out there. Valley Habitat Agency is a partner in some of this stewardship work. Derek's team does ongoing maintenance, and then we have an adaptive management component to sort of look at how we're doing and where it's all going. This is a little bit of a snapshot of what protected species distribution looks like on the property. This is just sort of one ambiguous, vague sort of zoom in, and I'm not going to interpret all the colors, but the main point I want you to take away from this slide is that protected, enlisted, and special species are basically everywhere on this property. You can't really go very far without encountering them. And so even though they're locally abundant, which is wonderful, it's really high quality habitat, they're super rare regionally, right? And again, it's that Serpentine Habitat Association. So one of the things I wanted to tease for you in thinking about this special habitat is something that's proposed for next year's work plan. And one of the things that we've been in dialogue about is whether we need to have a preserve designation policy, a board policy that would look at sort of designating primary uses of land through a kind of title. So a great example of that is we already have an agricultural preserve, right? We know what we do in the Pajaro River Agricultural Preserve. That's what it's about. Staff, I think, have been asking bigger questions about, should we have something like an ecological reserve, or maybe an urban park is appropriate in some cases. So without answering all of that today, I just wanted to say that's a policy that staff is proposing to start next fiscal year, and the Use and Management Committee can look forward to enjoying that discussion. Without putting the cart before the horse, I would say that in almost any criteria, Maiona Yakima would rank as the highest for conservation value and biodiversity, befitting of whatever title we decided should have or should not have. So I also wanted to share how we're going to monitor everything we're doing out there. And essentially, we've broken it down into 6 zones. And I don't know if it's easiest for me to sort of Vanna White this over here, but in the core of the property, you have zones area 6, which is that gateway, the staging area, areas 1, 2, and 3. And 1, 2, and 3 are the areas where we have trails. And they are also where we have some of the most sensitive habitats. So that's kind of some of the focus of our monitoring, areas 1, 2, and 3, where there's that nexus between people and habitat. And then areas 4 and 5 in the north and south are distinct because they don't have public access. So they're kind of our controls, not to say that it's an experiment, but they're a way of sort of looking at the landscape without public access. And we probably don't have to monitor them quite as frequently. Whereas sort of areas 1, 2, and 3, core of the access, core of the habitat. That's where our focus will be, our efforts will be focused. And then there's kind of a seasonal aspect to this. I think you can appreciate that in the springtime, that's when a lot of the human demand is. And then sort of in the off season, we anticipate lower levels of use, though who knows, hasn't been open. So kind of wait and see there. But essentially, we're going to use a variety of tools. There's eyes on the ground from our staff. There's volunteers doing different things out there. And then we're hoping to sort of systematize this effort through GIS. So some of you have probably started to use apps on your phone for different kind of mapping things. Well, the tool we're looking at called Survey 123 essentially allows you to take a picture and fill out a little easy form. So you can imagine Matthew Freeman is going off trail. One of our open space technicians says, hey, please stay on the trail. And then in the log, they might, fill out this little survey, say, hey, observed one Matthew Freeman going off trail, right? That kind of idea. And obviously the purposes of gathering this data is to figure out, is our messaging, is the collective tools that we're using working or not, and to sort of set up an adaptive management discussion. So this is very simplified, but just to sort of ground us in what it might look like out here in the wildflower season. Yeah.
So can you just tell me a little bit about what are the green are those roads?
Yes.
The area to the road, the top, is at the top of the road for the road connecting.
Yeah, so the question was, for the benefit of our Zoom listeners, was what are the lines on the map and are they roads and trails? So I can later in the slide deck, I have a better depiction of the trail system if that's what you're interested in. But yeah, for the purposes of this, the monitoring slide sort of gets at all the infrastructure. So when we're out there, we kind of know where we are. But yeah, that is, I think you're asking about the Ridge Road and monitoring area 3. That's correct. And that is sort of connected to or part of a future alignment of the Bay Area Ridge Trail, right?
Aaron, would you like to take additional questions now, or do you want to wait to the end of the presentation?
I think I prefer them to the end if that's all right, the
No
board.
problem.
Okay, I'm going the wrong way. So thinking about adaptive management, we anticipate collecting data, gathering data primarily during the wildflower season when human use is the highest. Always be gathering data, but it'll be more intensive then. In summer, we're proposing to collate all this data and kind of have a discussion of how's it going, what's working, what's not working. And then kind of in the fall, winter, conceptually, we'd be implementing those changes. So a very literal example, observed trail widening for many, could be from any use. We'd have a conversation, do an assessment of the severity of the issue, and then we might put in some signs, right? So we have to still draft, I have to still draft, it's on my desk to do an adaptive management plan that kind of gets into these issues, but this kind of teases the framework. And obviously, there's really small things that can be done in the field. There's kind of bigger things that are more complicated, like larger fencing, that kind of stuff. So there'll be a whole sort of range of adaptive management actions. So shifting a little bit, I think I've set the stage for what the habitat is like out there, what the set of considerations are. And, we are not the first agency to think very long and hard about how to manage public access in sensitive habitats. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of a flyover. And if the board is interested, maybe at the end, we could talk more about some of these examples if you're curious. But there are reservation systems, like if you've gone backpacking in the Sierras or in Yosemite, you're probably familiar with that, or Big Basin. There are easy access permits, and we'll talk more about those. But one of my first jobs was sitting in the Big Sur Ranger Station, handing out camp stove permits for $2 to anyone who wanted them. There are docent-led hikes, like if you visited the elephant seals at Año Nuevo, in order to see them during their mating season, you actually have to go with the docents to do that. Signage and fencing is, of course, kind of everywhere in our parks now, but an interesting example of note relating to habitat is the Crumb Clean campaign. And this is a campaign that I was a part of that is focused on campgrounds in sort of the marbled murrelet habitat, the redwood habitat of the Santa Cruz Mountains. And really, people leave crumbs out. Predatory birds like crows and Stellar's days eat those, and then they in turn eat the marbled murrelet. So the campaign is just all about exactly what it says, crumb clean, and it's been pretty effective in some cases. There are also seasonal closures. For instance, if you're interested in going rock climbing at Sanborn County Park, you might be miffed to realize that during migratory bird season, there are nesting raptors in a certain rock formation, and you just can't climb there. So that's a regular thing, regular closure. There are also tools to designate areas within a preserve or a park as sort of special zones of habitat. Where I used to work at MidPenn, we had these things called conservation management units, and they were a board designation that essentially said this area's primary objective is to manage habitat. So sometimes that could be like wetlands for red-legged frogs. Another example is San Francisco garter snake habitat. There are 1,000 of these beautiful snakes left, and that's an area that's not really suitable for public access, as you could imagine. And then other times they said, you know what, this area is so degraded that until this organization restores it, we want to keep people out of there. So in other words, not because of the high quality habitat, but actually because of the reverse. And then finally, there's a tool that I kind of previewed earlier, which are just sort of broader designations. Most commonly, you kind of see them in our state parks, but you have state historic parks and state natural reserves. There's the Golden Gate National Recreation Area. There's the Point Reyes National Seashore. You get the idea that there are all these sort of designations that sort of drive an overall management ethos. So, all of these are available to us here, and staff is going to show you what we're proposing sort of based on some of these tools. So before getting into what our proposal is, we want to think about what really are our goals out here in terms of this interim public access period. And this top one is the one that I think resonated most, which was facilitate public access in the unique and sensitive habitats in a comparably unique and sensitive manner. Public enjoyment and education is, of course, a goal out there as well. One of the things we all felt was to get it right from the beginning, to minimize any changes that we might have to make later, right? Maybe like a kind of no regrets kind of theory. We also wanted to gather a lot of data, and you saw that in the monitoring plan, to inform a final operations plan that would then be approved by the board. And we wanted to use data to address any concerns or issues with partners and stakeholders, right? There's a lot of interest in this particular habitat because it is so special, and we wanted to gather information to say, yes, this is working, and yes, we're doing it in the right way. Maybe I'll skip this slide in the interest of time, but as the board knows, this area has been open to the public in the past through what we called open access days. And these were kind of sneak previews in the springtime where we took interested folks out there, and they were really popular, as some of you may know. The primary user group, I would say, was kind of botanists and plant enthusiasts. So, probably not representative of the public at large, right? But a particular user group that certainly is going to be visiting this place in the future. Really interested in pictures, of course, because it's beautiful. These are rare plants that you really can't find anywhere else. So for the botanists, it's kind of a cool opportunity. These were all docent-led and staff-led. So, there was a lot of good behavior, I think, in people respecting the habitat. But I should be frank in saying that, there were users, even under the direction of staff and docents, who did stray off trail, right? Being excited. And we all do it, right? It's not to cast judgment on human behavior, but to recognize that even in a kind of controlled environment with a little bit of supervision, there were still people going off trail. And like I described earlier, that is one of the big, and if not principal, threat to the Bay checker spot butterfly habitat. The other thing I'll note is that there were not any equestrians or bikers in these public access days, whereas when we've opened this preserve, it is a multi-use trail system. So there'll be new user groups. It won't be just botanists, right? It'll be a whole swath of the public. So again, grounding us, the ridge and the gateway. What we're proposing during this sort of early period, and that's from this May 20th to June 12th, is kind of a twofold approach on the gateway. Again, that's the ridge with the trail system. Reverse, the gateway is as you think it is, and then the ridge is where the trail system is located. We're proposing to have the gateway open 7 days a week. So if you want to roll up to the preserve and hike within this area that I'll show you a map of, you can do that during the preserve hours 7 days a week. The ridge, which is where the longer trail system is located and is where that bay checker spot butterfly habitat is principally located, is going to be closed on Mondays and Tuesdays. Those are probably the low visitation points for most of our preserves. The rest of the week, we're proposing what we're calling a butterfly pass on Monday, Thursday, Friday, and we'll talk more about what a butterfly pass is. And then on the weekends, very similar to open access days in this springtime period, we're proposing docent-led tours twice a day. The proposed hours of operation are from 10 to 4, and you may note that's a little shorter than normal. But that is a period in which the butterfly has warmed up and is able to relocate itself. So in the morning, it's too cold. In the evening, it's too cold. So the sort of biological advice was really, if they're not able to move themselves, they could be harmed, just in the course of being in the wrong place. So those hours are really for the benefit of the butterfly. So this is kind of during butterfly season this year because, we're still building the staging area. The actual springtime season is a little bit different. Going forward, what we would propose is that starting daylight savings time on November 5th, which roughly coincides with the beginning of the butterfly doing this, this would continue these hours of operation through November 5th to May 31st. And then I'll show you in just a second what the sort of summertime operations look like. So again, different things for the gateway, different things for the ridge, a little bit different operations during the weekdays, during the weekend. It is a little complicated. I think that's fair to say, even with this beautiful chart I put together. But part of what we're trying to do is actually gather data on how people interface with this preserve after we first opened it. So, this butterfly pass concept, it really aims to be similar to a camp stove permit. If you've ever used U.S. Forest Service land, this is what you have to do. It's really easy. You can get it online. It's often free. And our kind of criteria or goals for this are that it can be acquired online in advance for no cost, or it can be obtained at the trailhead through an iPad that our staff will have, or you could do it on your phone right there on the spot. Again, no cost. It's really just a commitment to stay on the trail. We've yet to sort of finalize the language, but you get the kind of basic ideas like, I understand this is important habitat. I agree to stay on the trail. That kind of language is what we're thinking about. No more than 2 minutes of reading. I think most of us who recreate, when we show up, we want to hit the trail. That's why we're there. We want to do our peace and quiet. We're proposing to have this be in effect for a whole year. So if you get it now, it'll last for a year. You don't have to do it again. Obviously, multiple languages are important to make this work in our area. And again, this is not for parking. This is simply to access the ridge in those periods where the butterfly is present and to get onto that trail system. The sort of underlying belief is that this will provide the minimum level of education about the unique habitat and rules for visitors before entering those sensitive habitats. This will probably be managed through Eventbrite for now, but in the long term, we'd like to get a more sophisticated system that kind of serves our needs and is good user experience for the public, right? So we want it to be pretty frictionless. So, in the beginning, there'll probably be some kinks, right, as we roll it out. But over time, we really want it to be smooth and efficient to protect the habitat and to not feel like a challenge for visitors to get access to the ridge. So this is the summer schedule. It's a little bit different. Same thing, the gateway open 7 days a week. On the ridge property where the long trails are, you would just need that butterfly pass for the rest of the week. There will be docent-led tours, but they're optional. They're not required in order to go out there. So again, during the springtime, peak demand, dose and lead tours. In the summer, all you need to do is get the butterfly pass before you can hit the trail. The hours of operation are longer. They are from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. This is, again, not the season when the butterfly is in effect. And I think staff's general feeling was that it's quite hot from 10 to 4 in the summer. And so, there's got to be some way to provide for early and late use, because that's probably the only desirable use during the summer period. I'll also note, based on some of my prior job experience, that when you have a preserve near a major commuter sort of pathway, people do get off and just spend 20 minutes clearing their head in their preserve. So for commuters going south on 101, bad traffic accident, Mayan o Yakima, not bad, right? The other thing I'll note, in sort of just thinking about our operations out here, and we've experienced it this year on the ground, is that because of the soils, because of the roads, and because of the designs of the trails, when it rains, it is really mucky out there. So unlike our other preserves where we can bring in equipment, we can bring in rock, and we can kind of address the underlying issue on our trails, that is really not true here. We can do little spot treatments, but essentially maybe different than some of our other preserves, there'll be more frequent winter closures because actually maintaining it is just much more difficult. And building new trail just means going right through that habitat that we're protecting, right? So you'll see a little bit more frequent closures. I know you get those emails every time one of these atmospheric rivers comes in. Staffing is a big part of making this work. This is higher than you see at our other preserves, essentially during that springtime period, and we're still kind of dialing in exactly when we need more staff, but you can imagine during the wildflower season, 1 or 2 folks at the gateway. This butterfly pass might feel a little weird without having presence there. So, having our staff greet people, manage parking issues, and facilitate the butterfly pass, and then having one person that's primarily charged with patrolling the ridge when it's open Wednesday to Sunday. In the summer, which we kind of anticipate, summer, fall is maybe the low use season, just based on the weather. But, we were sort of noticing this year that when there's a break in the rain, really actually quite lovely this time of year if the weather is sort of good. So, who knows what the off season will kind of look like, but essentially we'll have 2 staff there. The longer day sort of means there are probably some more shifts. So, Derek's got to kind of dial in some of the operational details with the staffing plan, but less staffing then, more staffing during the high season. Our volunteers are going to play a big role out here. They've been doing this for roughly 10 years, have a relationship with this place. And we really hope to lead some of that really excellent docent-led programming for this interim period, first off, during the weekends primarily, and then we might have some extra weekday ones. And then we'll see kind of what that looks like going next year. We're hoping to engage them in some of this monitoring that I was talking about, because, you can tell we're playing with a bunch of different things here in this first year of operations. And we want our staff and our volunteers to be informing us about what's working and what's not working. So this is the map that I think Director Annabelle was calling for. This is draft. It's not totally final. This is sort of a sneak preview. But you can see there is the gateway, which is on that inset. That's where you're parked, and there's a trail that has been named that Mayan Waiai, I think is how you say it. Don't hold me to that. The Overlook Trail. And that's that gateway property. That's that loop system that'll be open 7 days a week. No butterfly pass required. You can just come in, enjoy it, pull over from your commute, et cetera, et cetera. And then heading into the ridge portion of the property, there are 3 trails there. They're all part of a central loop system. I want to say they're 4 miles. Is that right, Lucas? 5 miles. Our very creative planning staff engaged both our staff and I believe our volunteer group in coming up with names. And so, my big reveal, these are the 3 names that are going to be out there. There's the Serpentine Seep Trail. There's the Thule Elk Trail, which is kind of that ridge one. And then the Bay Checker Spot Trail is on the south one. So, some of the values that I talked about are sort of represented in those names. So I guess in the interest of answering any questions from Director Annable, does this satisfy your interest about where stuff is?
I was concerned about the Bay Area Ridge Trail. At one time, it still is on the master plan, go across the top of the ridge. But I didn't see that as part of this, nor did I hear how that is going to work with as much closure.
Through the chair, I can answer a little bit about that question there. Right now, we have the section of trail that doesn't go out to dead ends. We wanted a loop system to it, so that's what is represented here. The green lines that you saw on those other maps were the roads that were there that would eventually become part of the Bay Area Ridge Trail system. We're working with county parks on the north end to see if we can secure parking there. And then we also have the right to establish trail on our neighboring properties with the Valley Water and with BTA. So once we have this open, we understand the logistics of operating it. We're going to be approaching those two entities to open up further trails to the south as well. And you will see the Bay Area Ridge Trail represented going out of that reserve, both to the north and to the south.
I just wanted to add that this month in April are the 2 months that the county parks department is receiving input from the public as to what they want to see on the revamping. We're not going to totally redo the trails plan, but if there are things like giving us to be able to park at the top, so we could come in on the beach, this is the time to contact county parks, and they have a website specifically for them.
Yeah, if I may do the chair, we have been coordinating with county parks on that, and so actually the alignments you're referring to are already included in that, and we'll be doing providing additional comments and likely support for the plan. But the Bay Checker Spot Trail connection will is included, and it's identified as a Bay Area Ridge Trail interconnection. And we are planning to dedicate those portions that will be open to the public this spring, probably looking at a potential dedication coordinated with the Ridge Trail this summer.
Great. So this is my last slide. Next steps, just to summarize, we're going to finalize a public access monitoring plan. I talked about GIS tools and sort of keeping our eyes on what's going on out there. We've got to finish the construction, obviously, too. That's getting wrapped up. We want to implement training for staff and volunteers in order to actually make this system work. May 20th is when we start the interim public access period, start that data gathering. The grand opening, October 13th and 14th. And then again, we kind of have our eyes on spring 24 as like our big sort of full-blown use of the preserve in this system. And then sort of once we've gone through that, and I think hopefully gathered sufficient data to see how our public access management is working, then we can come back to the Use and Management Committee and the board with a recommendation for what we hope to be a final operations plan that will include some adaptive management. So with that, I welcome any questions or comments from the board.
Okay, at this time, any questions? Director Gill? No?
Well done.
Director
Yes.
Alexander?
Great presentation, very well thought out. I was just curious how long the Knoll Trail that's down in the gateway. I think it's pretty short.
Lucas, I mean, I think it's less than a quarter mile.
Yeah, that's what it looks like on the map. Okay.
Director Paul? No?
Madam Chair, just one question or maybe a suggestion for the team is because we're going to be coming back to the board after the kind of popular spring 24 wildflower season, we might want to have the Use and Management Committee members come out on some of the days out there with staff to kind of actually have eyes on the ground and see how the public is interacting with the space, so you'll have a firsthand look yourself and not just relying on staff to inform you about recommendations.
Yes, George Randall.
We were talking about how to keep people on the trail. So many spots that, you know, the rocks are right there, the wildflowers and the temptations. Stuff like that. Is to get out with the camera, so I can get a perfect picture of the rock with the flower. Are there gonna be some photo areas that are built into the design? So that it's not up either with a platform that people stand on or something.
Yeah, that's a great question. I was hoping it's depicted here, but it's not. There are so a lot of the I'll say the Gateway property is really designed. Lucas and his team designed it in a way to have a lot of that. Some of the nice plants and views are actually right there. So, you know, I think for a certain user group, they'll be very excited by that opportunity. It's very accessible, easy to get to. Along the Serpentine Trail and the Bay Checker Spot Trail and the Tuliauk Trail, there are 3 shade structures. They're sort of stopping points that we think are inviting opportunities to take pictures. But I think you're getting at a good kind of human behavioral question, is sort of as much as we've programmed this in to protect the habitat and to attract people to the right places. You know, there are people who've been out there before. There are people who like outcroppings, all that kind of stuff. So I think part of our monitoring and our adaptive management plan is to think about those very things, because a lot of folks, you know, Andrea, Stu Weiss, others have been like, you know, should we provide a spot, right? Kind of that thing. So I think you're getting at a really important concept and something we want to monitor and learn from. And that'll be something we do through our adaptive management plan. Like, yeah, should we have a designated sign, like, you know, photo area, right?
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank
I
you.
can add
Jennifer.
one.
I've
little bit
known
more
to
that.
chase a butterfly or up there, you know, trying to get that. Okay, sure.
And through the chair, I could add one more thing to that.
Yes.
The Bay Checkered Spot Trail, the new section that we've designed, goes through some of those rock outcroppings. So it was designed to provide a up close and personal experience when you could stay on the trail and be able to take those shots and still be on the trail. So we were thinking about that when we did design that trail on that side of the bridge.
That's great. Any other questions? I know we're getting short on time. I just want to make sure everybody's chance to comment. Good. Aaron, thank you for the excellent presentation. I look forward to knowing that you did a really getting up there in a couple of years. It's been up there, but it's one of my most favorite places to say. Absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you.
Okay, with the end of the presentation,
I just wanted to give the members of the public an opportunity to go.
okay, thank you.
If caller, if you would like to ask a question, you can press star 9 to raise your hand.
Okay, no members of the public? Okay, with that, no members of the public, we are adjourned from the board meeting.
I think we wanted 5.
To relocate, yes.